something happened, I don't know, but I got really, really sick. And I ended up just collapsing in this kind of in this bush at the side of the road. And I was completely out of it, didn't really know what was going on. And this pilgrim came along and picked me up and gave me some water, and then just carried me for the next probably like 6-7 kilometers to the next town. And it must have took him forever to do it. And it must have been hard because I was really ill and I was throwing up at the side of the path and everything like that. But he managed to get me to the next town, and he got me a bed. He bought me some food and left me some water, and then he left, and I woke up the next day and he was gone. And I just remembered that was like one of the kindest things that had ever happened to me, because I was totally out there in the elements on my own. And I just couldn't believe that somebody would do something like that. And I was constantly, throughout the course of this walk, I was constantly confronted with acts of kindness like that.
Welcome to the show, Paul.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad to have you. I've been thinking about this next episode with you. I've been in contact with you since I ran into you with your Map 6 group. Would you call it a collective?
It's a collective, yeah. There's 10 of us.
Yeah. I saw you in Italy when I was with my partner Steve with Urbanaut, and you guys were doing a project out there, and I had already kind of, after that, dived into your work, and I was just like, yes, we have to talk. So I'm really excited to have you on the show today. But before we get started, before we do any of that, for all the people that don't know who you are, go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience, and we'll start there.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So my name's Paul Walsh. I'm a British photographer, and I'm based in the east of England, which is a kind of a rural part of England, not far from the coast. We recently moved here a couple of years ago, me and my family. But originally I'm from the Midlands, from the second city in the UK, which is a big post-industrial city, important in the Industrial Revolution in the UK. Lots of canals there, and warehouses and factories, and that was kind of the landscape of my childhood. So that has really played a part in the development of my photography. I moved up from Brighton, where I studied an MA in photography there, and where we started the Map 6 Collective, which was about 14 years ago. My practice, since doing the MA, which was 2010 to 2012, I've been concentrating on personal work, personal projects, and developing the idea of walking as a creative process. And that's mainly carried out photographing within the landscape, looking at people, how they shape the landscape, and vice versa, how the landscape shapes the people. So I've been working on a series of different projects, some of which I'll show you today. And with Map 6, we've worked on 9 projects in the last 14 years, and we've been exhibiting those. We're working on a new one in Italy, which is really exciting, really excited about that. And I think we're working on a 5th publication, and just kind of progressing the idea of working collectively. And as I said, my own practice is really about walking. So each project I work on, I begin by looking at how I'm going to walk it. So that could be following random lines on a map. It could be doing a long distance pilgrimage. It could be walking at night, walking with somebody, having a conversation. So each project trying something different and seeing how that develops. And excitingly, I've got a new book, which is just coming out now with Another Place Press, which is available to pre-order. So hopefully I'll get the chance to talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah. I can't wait to dive into the work. Yeah. But I'll let you finish. I apologize for cutting you off.
No. I was just going to say, Yeah, I think I've been taking pictures really for about just over 20 years. I initially started out as a painter. I studied painting at university, came to photography that way, fell in love with photography, which I'm sure I'll talk about. And then when I went back to study the MA, I got a lot more serious about my work. And over the years, I've kind of done various photography jobs, pretty much, like wedding photography. I've done photographic bands, theatre, worked as an expedition photographer, portrait photographer. So they've all kind of fed into my picture making, sort of the way that I make pictures now. It's all been a part of it. So, yeah, I think that's essentially me.
I think that's great. It's I'm always curious about those origins, and a lot of times, you can look at a photographer as like, by the camera, but I think in a lot of ways we are like image makers. And so like, I'm kind of curious a little bit, were you always kind of someone that was artistic, or talk to me a little bit about that origin? When you were young, were you kind of artistically inclined, or how did you come into that? And I've heard this quite a bit, this transition from painting into photography. So I'm kind of I'm curious about that. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, growing up, I was quite a shy person. I'd say to some degree I still am now. But I think like the thing that I always felt drawn towards was expressing myself through painting, or through, that's moved on to photography. I had my sister was a painter as well, so she kind of inspired me. She was a drawer, really good at drawing. But I just felt really comfortable with expressing myself that way, and I just felt more comfortable doing that than with words. So I started that way, and then I developed painting, and then through painting I came to photography, and I just fell in love with the instantaneity of taking pictures. So like, I was working on these big canvases at the time, which was about the urban industrial landscape in Birmingham. And I was kind of exploring these old warehouses and factories. I'll show you some of the work in a minute. And I was bringing back from these places like charcoal and wood, and I found like some old paint and things like that. And I was creating these big urban canvases of this, and I started to take pictures there as well. And what I would do with the pictures is I was shooting it on film. I would print them up, photocopy them to degrade them, stick them onto the canvas, paint over the top of them, and that became a bit of a fine art painting process. But in the process of doing that, I fell in love with photography, with the picture making element of it, of being able to be away from the canvas and being able to walk, explore, meet people. Those are all the things that I really fell in love with. And I suppose essentially I'm still doing that now, but in a bit more of a performative sense.
Was your family always, they produced 2 artists, it sounds like. Is art kind of a family thing? No, not at all. Apart from my sister, who was really into drawing and painting, not at all. But my folks were brilliant at supporting me. They always encouraged me to do the things that I wanted to do. But no, my parents were just hardworking. My dad worked in a factory, and my mum did another similar job, and they worked in the city. And but they also appreciated the idea of getting us out of the city as well. So they used to take me and my sisters walking and out of, like, into the countryside, and that's kind of where the love for walking began as well. But in terms of art, no, I suppose I was kind of the first person in the family to go in that direction. I think that's interesting, and I'm kind of curious a little bit about that connection to the post-industrial landscape, and what interests you about that? Did you watch it change, or were you kind of in this already changed landscape and you were asking questions? Talk to me a little bit about why you were looking at that and why that was interesting to you.
Well, I mean, where I grew up, it was literally right in the heart of the city, and not far from our childhood home is one of the most famous motorway interchanges in the UK, which is this enormous motorway structure called, well, it's commonly known as Spaghetti Junction. And
I think I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's really famous, and that was literally about 2-3 minutes walk from our house. And
okay,
I really loved exploring. That was my big thing when I was a kid, and these were the places that I was kind of exploring and getting up to all kinds of mischief. And I used to love walking under these motorways or climbing into these old warehouses along the canal. And I used to be I walked all the canals around where we lived, and I got to know the city really well by exploring these kind of waterways. So initially, it was just basically that was just where we lived. It was these were the places where I found fun. But later on in life, when I started making the paintings, and then I also went back and did another photography project about these kind of waterways as well. I was most definitely thinking about the history. I was thinking about how important these places were in the past and how quickly they become defunct. Like the canals were like the highways of the past. They were the things that moved produce up and down the country. And as I said, Birmingham was at the heart of the Industrial Revolution. So this, at one point in time, this was like a really busy waterway. And in the space of just a few years, when the motorways come along, they just fell into decline. And from a visual point of view, I found that really fascinating, because it was just like the transience of the landscape, how quickly it's moved on. And they went from being the heart of the country to these kind of, these places in decline that were overgrown and forgotten about. So I found that really visually interesting. And obviously I was very sort of personally attached to these places, because I feel as if that's where I've come from.
So you started photographing and you were painting them. And you then started to go, I really like this photography thing. Is that when you decided to do an MA? So talk to me about what was that transition like? What was that feeling that you had that kind of inspired you to kind of develop that?
Well, I did a degree in illustration, and I was beginning to sort of feel a little bit disenchanted with it. I kind of felt as if it was moving away from this idea of expressing myself and more towards literally illustrating somebody else's work. And I think I was more interested in the sort of expressing myself side of art, or whatever it was that I wanted to do. I was still really thinking that through. And I had a class during the illustration course where it was the basics of photography. And the first ever assignment that I had was, you have a roll of film, and you go out, you've got 36 exposures, you go out and basically photograph somewhere and express yourself and try to put that into the images. And then you come back, dev the pictures, print them, and then present them to the group. And again, that's simply thinking back, that was kind of what I'm doing now, which is going out and expressing myself, but telling stories about places as well. So I just really fell in love with that process. I had a really good friend who we studied fine art together when we were like straight out of school. He's still one of my best friends, and he started getting into photography, and he got a job in a camera shop, and I used to go there all the time. We were trying out new cameras, going out shooting together. And so he was a really big inspiration at the beginning. And then I just thought, I really like this. I want to go back, and perhaps this is the direction I want to go in with art. I did an access course in Bourneville College in Birmingham, and And this is when I was doing these kind of large canvases. I was producing them for a final show. And in that 1 year, I kind of went from being a painter to a photographer. And I thought, I want to go to university, study this and understand it more. And then in 2000 to 2003, I went and did a degree it was with John Moores in Liverpool. And that was kind of the beginning, but I learned a lot on that degree. Certainly I fell in love with books, and I fell in love with lots of other photographers. Like I was introduced to people like Winogrand and Friedlander and Eggleston and Haas and Harry Gruelle and all these people that I love that had a connection with painting. But I still kind of didn't take it seriously for some time because I kind of went off on a deviation. I travelled for about 8 or 9 years, always with my camera. And then it got to a point in 2010 when I thought, I need to take this more seriously now. This is what I really love. I was in my 30s at that point. And then I decided I want to move back to England and do an MA in photography and sort of really try to understand what it was that I was interested in doing with photography.
I'm always curious about that little transition because, a lot of times it starts out kind of as this thing, and then all of a sudden it switches into kind of either an obsession or a passion or something. And I can tell with you it's a passion, and I can tell that you are really connected to it. And when we get to see the body, the work that you do, it translates. And so I'm kind of curious a little bit. You had mentioned some of your initial kind of maybe influences or inspirations in photography. Can you talk to me a little bit about who some of those might be and why?
In terms of people, well, I'd say I've had a few key kind of influences in terms of people. My first one I said was my friend Steve, who, we studied fine art together, as I said, and he ended up going to study photography in Wolverhampton. And, he worked in this camera shop, and it was kind of like, it just opened up a world to me as well. I was always visiting him in there. He had all the latest gear. So me and him would go out. He'd be able to take these cameras and lenses, and we'd go out shooting for the day. It could be going on the tops of car parks and photographing at night, or going out into the hills and going for walks and photographing. And it was. And then as I was taking more pictures, I'd show them to him, and we kind of discussed them, and that was the very first kind of moment where I was actually talking about pictures and what they mean and what I was trying to say. So he was a big influence at the beginning. And then later on, I had a lecturer at when I was studying my initial degree, photography degree, called Greg Leach, and he was kind of one of a group of photographers who were prominent in the 80s, color flash photographers. His work it's kind of like a bit like street photography, but using flash, and it was quite political, and it's really unusual. It was similar to, or you might put it next to people like Anna Fox or Martin Parr, Paul Graham, but he was really influential in terms of teaching me about this whole history of photography, and that was the beginning of trying to think where my own photography could fit in with that. So during that period, I really began to love the work of people like Lee Freelander and Gary Winogrand, these photographers that would walk around and make these amazing pictures and play.
I love Lee Freelander.
Yeah,
he's one of my favorites. I saw a show of him in Barcelona.
Yeah, he's so endlessly creative. Really.
Yeah.
And he's kept that going throughout his whole career. It could be.
Yeah, and you can see that. Yeah.
It's amazing, from photographing his shadow to photographing in the streets, photographing statues, or driving around in the car, photographing out the window. He's always got these.
Yeah, out the window. Those are my favorite.
It's amazing.
From his car window. Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
And they're not gimmicks either. They're like, you look at the pictures and you think, wow, these are amazing. You know? So yeah, people like that were really big, and obviously there's people like Eggleston, which is, you know, the amazing sense of color in it and composition, and sort of just trying to understand what each of these, you know, what's he saying in these pictures are very aloof, and I think I was drawn to those because of this training that I had in painting, this compositional training and thinking about light and all of those things. And then also Magnum photographers as well, people like Harry Goyart that I really loved, really about colour. And also at the time when I was doing my degree, I started to get really interested in the idea of travelling and sort of just breaking out, being sort of freeing myself really. Yeah, so Greg was a big influence in terms of teaching me about the history of photography and introducing me to those photographers. And a lot more as well. And then later on in life, when I did the MA, we had some amazing lecturers there on the MA. We had like Mark Power was a big one, and I loved his work. So the way he spoke about work, the questions that he asked, he speaks so eloquently about the history of photography. It was just really inspiring, and also the way he makes pictures is just a real craftsman. So his work in particular and the way he talked about it has been a big influence in my thinking. But since then, Map 6 has been my biggest influence because, you know, there's 9 other photographers in there. They're all really good friends of mine. I love them all. They all work really differently. They all shoot differently. We're all there for one another. So, yeah, they've been a massive influence on the development on my work over the last 10, 14 years.
I'm thinking about, you know, some of those influences and one of the things that I really like about a lot of them is there's this like freedom with the medium, you know. You can, you know, especially when you learn in school, you're kind of given these rules to kind of follow. But every one of those that you kind of talk about, they really challenge the edges of it, kind of expand those rules, or don't follow any. You know, I like that freedom, and I can't stop thinking about this idea of walking. And I did a project once on it, and I called it the shape of walking. That was my project, and I would pick these paths and I would photograph across those paths. But for me, it was about, you know, kind of like being where your feet are, being present. But the other part is that like you're also, the thing about walking is it's kind of like a meditation. And so you're with yourself, you're thinking, you're asking questions, and I'm kind of curious what that means to you. You've kind of made that the center of your practice in a lot of ways, and you've pointed to the importance of it in our previous conversations leading up to the podcast. So talk to me a little bit about that and why it's central to what it is that you do.
Well, I think walking it's always played a really big part in my life, going back from, you know, what I was talking about earlier about exploring the city and you know, just getting out and being part of the landscape. So I did a lot of that, and then at school, I joined a walking group, and we used to go walking a lot in Wales and the Lake District, Peak District. So I became really comfortable sort of being outdoors. I'm still a really outdoorsy person, but I love camping, things like that. And then when I was at university, I used to have this thing where I'd just sort of look on a map, and I'd just look at places on a map and just be really curious about them and go, I want to go there, and jump on a train and just go spend the weekend walking there. And I used to, it sounds a bit odd now, but I used to just sleep outside. I'd bring my sleeping bag and just sleep under a tree or on a bench or anywhere. I know it sounds a bit odd, but I just loved it. I think I was really trying to connect with this sort of wilder side of myself, you know. And I said that I was quite a shy person, so I think walking has tried to help me think that through and tried to get over that over the years. And like I say, connect with this wilder aspect of myself. But then with each project that I work on, it's different. The walking is different. It does different things. Being in the city and following paths through a city is a very different experience from walking, say, along a quiet coastline where there's no people there. And I'd say like the last 2-3 years, I've been working on a personal project close to where I live. It's a new body of work. Haven't really shown it yet, but the process of walking is really different because it's very immersive. It's about walking back and forth along this one stretch of coastline, getting to really know that place rather than just passing through it in one go and sort of making images as you go. This is about really becoming attached to this piece of landscape. And then sort of as I'm walking, like you say, the rhythm of feeling the landscape beneath your feet and the actual experience of being there, the smells, the sounds, feeling part of the sea and the cliff line and everything like that. And also thinking about what I know about the place, the history of the place, also thinking about memories. So I've been thinking a lot about my mother who passed away a few years ago, and the fact that I've recently had 2 children and that sort of passage of life, mortality, and those things are, when I'm walking there, kind of floating through my mind at the same time as being in this place. And it's kind of an odd thing because I'm walking along and I know that I'm navigating around rocks and I'm navigating around trees that are lying on the beach, but I'm also half in my head as well, thinking about these things and recalling memories. And the camera becomes an extension of those things, and somehow the pictures that come out are expressions of all of those things coming together. But that's very different, as I say, from walking as a city or walking in along a canal towpath and thinking about the history of the place and thinking about the flow of water in the canal and how, making connections between that and the flow of time. So, yeah, I think with each project that I work on, I have to think about how I want to be when I'm walking. And it depends on what the landscape's like and what the project is actually about. I hope that makes sense.
That's really, no, it totally makes sense. And I think it's really quite thoughtful. I can't help but think about all those times that I've gone on walks and I'm in a kind of emotional state, and it colors the world that I'm seeing. Mm-hmm. And you can walk the same path but see it with different eyes depending on where you are mentally and emotionally.
Absolutely.
And sometimes that same kind of act of walking is then driven by a kind of curiosity. Where is this place? Why is this place? Why is that building there? Why is it abandoned? And so you have those kind of 2 variations. And I think it's really interesting as an American, we don't walk anywhere. We drive everywhere. So this idea of walking might be foreign to some of my audience, but since I've been in Europe, I've actually walked a lot, and I really appreciate the discoveries around every corner and the little moments. And, have you ever been shocked at the end of one of those rolls at what you saw on that path?
I wouldn't say I've been shocked. And I would certainly say that because a lot of the time I'm working in a way where I'm going from A to B, so it's a finite experience. Yeah. You never really know what you're going to see. Do they allude to what you're saying? But true. I think for me, it's really important to research before I go on a walk, to put me into a kind of a mental state and to prepare me for what I'm going to see, so I can see those images happening, or I can think about them beforehand. So I can't really think of anything that I've been massively shocked by, but it's always a continual surprise. But I feel like over the years, with this element of research, I always try to prepare myself for what I'm going to see by knowing as much about a place as possible. so I can try to make sense of it as I'm passing through it.
I was super curious now to look at your images, and so you have prepared about 20 images or so of like kind of the evolution of your work. So since we're already kind of diving into your process and what you do and how you do it, take us through that body of work, and we can go ahead and start sharing and take a look.
So I thought I'd share some images to sort of talk about how my practice has evolved over the years. So I'm going to show some really early stuff, taking it up to the work that I've made as part of this book that's coming out. So this first image is one of the canvases that I was working on as a painter. And as you see, I was doing an access course at Bourneville College. This was about 98, 99. And the series shows large canvases of the urban landscapes around Birmingham, around the canals. And what I was doing was using charcoal and emulsion that I'd found in one of these warehouses, and wood that I found as well, dust. And I was putting that onto the canvas and working it in using masking tape. And what I started to do to create a greater sense of depicting these places was taking pictures. And I started taking a 35mm camera with me, just taking a few sort of not particularly skillful pictures of the exteriors and the interiors of the buildings. And then I'd take it back to university or to college and print the work up. And then as a way of working it into the canvas so it wasn't so prominent, I would photocopy the images, photocopy them again, sometimes put them onto acetate, and then work over the top of them. But through the process of doing that, I felt really liberated from being stuck inside. You know, I said before, I've always been this outdoorsy person. I love being out walking. And I just really like this instantaneous process of going out and taking pictures and allowing that to be the creative element of being outside. And just quite quickly, really, during the course of that year of the Access course, I slowed down painting and I started making more and more pictures. And that was really the beginning of photography for me. And that was what made me decide to go back to university and do a degree in it.
I love that. It's really quite interesting. When you say big canvas, what do you mean? What's the size?
Well, this isn't one of the big ones. This was kind of like maybe A1, but I was doing kind of ceiling to. That's
pretty big.
No, it was pretty big, but I was doing really big ones, like a lot bigger than that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but it was just this kind of. You'd spend weeks, or I'd spend weeks working on one of these canvases in the studio, and it was just different from being outside. I just loved walking and having the camera with me, and it was liberating. So that was basically the turning point for me.
You were doing a couple of things that liberated you. One was the photography, and then one using found materials to create with it. I think that's what's really interesting. It's like very tangible and tactile. I like that a lot. And you said this was not skillful. That's a good shot. Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah, well, photography,
the early stuff. Yeah,
it's not my best work. Let's put it like that.
I know.
but it was
proceed as you wish.
It was a good moment. It was a good moment because it was prior to that I'd been doing a lot of kind of more typical oil and sort of watercolor work and landscapes, and it was just kind of I just discovered this thing which was like, actually maybe the landscapes that I'm interested in are not the beautiful pastoral ones, but these kind of more industrial ones. That's a lot more who I am. That's where I've come from. So I really found that, and I think that was also the beginning of a lot of the things that interest me visually with photography. Don't ordinarily like going to, or not ordinarily drawn to going to what people would say is beautiful places. I think I do have this thing in me that I like going to these kind of industrial places, probably because that's the sort of place that I came from when I was a kid. So after that, I went to university and discovered all these photographers that I mentioned before, and fell in love with that side of things and started making more work going out and sort of wandering around. And I got quite into street photography. And it was kind of like this. I guess I had this romantic idea of carrying a camera everywhere and capturing these moments in the street. And I've got absolutely hundreds of these pictures on my hard drive, these kind of decisive moments. After I graduated, I traveled a lot, and I spent the next sort of 8-9 years traveling around with my camera and doing lots of different things, working in lots of different jobs. But I'd always have my camera, and I'd always be taking these kind of pictures, and I think they made me confident at composing pictures amongst people, made me quicker operating the camera. And I often listened to music as well when I was doing it to get absorbed into the moment. And music's always played a big part in my photography as well. I don't listen to it now when I'm making work, but I do always listen to music when I'm editing. So that's another kind of part of my sort of behind the scenes creative process. But back in those days, I used to listen to all kinds of music when I was photographing.
What were you listening to?
Well, it could be anything from, in the early days, extreme death metal to drum and bass. To techno, to I don't really listen to such hard music now. Yeah, but nowadays I listen to a lot more ambient stuff, a lot more modern classical stuff, and that really gets me into the zone when I'm editing. But yeah, music's a big part of my life, definitely. But these kind of street images, I think I got to a point where, like, I was just thinking, what's the point? I don't really know what the point of making this work is. I love the decisive moment, but I was beginning to think that I want to go a bit deeper into my photography. And also there were more single images as opposed to series. And it was at this time, it was 2009, I was beginning to think I want to go back home to England and start and rediscover that place and start being a lot more serious about my work. I did show some of those street images in like pop-up exhibitions, but it was kind of, I think I just hit a dead end with it really, and felt as if I was copying people, almost copying the photographers that I admired. And I felt as if I needed to sort of take my own path really. And going back to university was really about me trying to discover a sort of deeper level to my photography, and find a new motivation. Tried to find what it was that I was really interested in.
I love that shot.
So that takes, the previous one, that was in Japan, in Tokyo.
Yeah. Well, it's just got like, it looks like a room partition. So it actually seems like it's just really interesting. You can tell you're developing your eye for the moment. And so like you can kind of see you kind of evolving once you kind of get into your series, which we're about to look at. So it's really interesting. So proceed as if. Yeah, proceed.
I think in those days, it was a lot about the moment, but I was also learning to handle light and composition and also learn how to operate the camera quickly, more intuitively. But then that takes me up to the MA, and this was, like I said, it was about trying to work more deliberately, trying to have a bit more of a process, trying to dig deep and think what it was that I was actually interested in with photography and where I wanted to go from there, and not just sort of float around making random pictures, but try and exhibit the work. And then prior to starting the actual course, we had to do work on a project about something that we found personal and develop it over the first year of the MA. And I moved to Brighton, which is where the MA was. I was really attracted to the lecturers who were on the course, so that was a big draw. And I started making work about the coastline, because I'd never lived at the coastline, and it was a really fascinating place for me. It was like, I grew up in the centre of England, which was hours away from the beach. All of our sort of childhood holidays were spent going to the coast. So it was kind of like this new fascinating realm where I could make work. So I set about walking the south coast of England from east to west. And it was a stretch of coastline I thought was interesting because it looked out onto Europe. And it was also, I thought of it as kind of a borderland between the sea and where people lived, which opened up sort of new perspectives and new horizons. And it was a place where you could be more imaginative looking out to sea. And the sea became a sort of a backdrop to the simple events that were happening there. And it also, the way that I was making the pictures where I was using weather and light, and they still kind of adhered a lot to the principles of painting that I'd learned. And the pictures were about place. This picture was made in Hastings, which isn't far from Brighton. So they were about place, obviously, but they were also about feeling, how I was feeling when I was walking. And, often with the overcast weather, it's quite melancholy, the south coast. And it creates a sense of isolation, particularly when I was walking there alone. So I was trying to capture that with the images that I was making. And
did you find it difficult? Like, I have a question. Did you find it difficult not to get the picturesque photo, the postcard, or is it just kind of in you to kind of find the other view? Because every time I go down there, I seem to always get this gorgeous photo, and and I'm like, that's not what I want.
Yeah, I don't know if the picturesque is. I don't think these pictures are picturesque that I'm showing you. I don't know if I've got the picturesque in me, really. It's kind of, I've got this kind of industrial Birmingham side in me, and that kind of comes out in the images. And I'm definitely more drawn to the sort of darker side of things rather than these what would traditionally be deemed as beautiful. So I don't.
I envy that. I want that. Maybe I should go.
I don't think I've
start. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think the picturesque things I've struggled with. Well, not in this work. I think I don't know how much of it is in me, the picturesque, but this next image, I mean, this was definitely about playing with those principles, the traditional idea of what a beautiful coastline image is, and then you've got this big sort of monolith in the middle of it, breaking up the composition and creating a really different sense to the images. So I do think a lot of this work, which I made it over 2 years, kind of the way that I worked was I'd do a stretch, walk it, go back, edit it, and then continue from that point all the way along the coast between I think it was Margate to Cornwall. And I just think that I was kind of tapping into the way that I felt when I was walking along this coastline and making these isolated, darker images of darker vision of the coast. But looking back, the important thing for me was it was the beginning of finding a structure, how to make work. And the structure was the walk. So when I look back at this work, I definitely feel that was a really big turning point for me. I found I'd been thinking a lot about how I'd made images in the past. I'd been thinking about this whole notion of walking and how important that was to me. And with the help of my lecturers and the other guys on the course, the guys in Map 6, I started to make connections between walking and the landscape and and making images. So moving on, this was in my second year. This is when I started to think more about the process of walking and trying to be a bit more experimental. And what I did with this work, well, at the time I was doing research for my dissertation, which I ended up writing on the history of walking and walking in London, and how that's kind of had a connection with photography. And so I was delving into these books, and I'd been reading a lot of people like Baudelaire and the Situationists, and reading about psychogeography, and how places had a mental kind of effect on your subconscious as you were walking through them. And I was really attracted to people like Ian Sinclair, who'd walked around the M25 motorway in London. Rebecca Solnit, who kind of did this amazing book, which is, if you're interested in walking, you need to read it. It's called Wanderlust, which traces the whole history of walking and what it means as a kind of a cultural phenomenon. And then people like Robert McFarlane, who was looking at lost places and things like that. And I was just really delving into the literature of walking. And what I'd been doing was I'd read books like by William Blake and Edgar Allan Poe, and as I said, Sinclair. And I'd got 7 of these books that I read, and I placed them on a map of London randomly, drew a line around the book, and then over the course of 7 days, walked the line and made pictures along that journey. So I had 7 walks, 7 days, 7 mini sets of pictures. And there were kind of there were more like ordinary moments that were not decisive moments like what had been taken before, but more about unremarkable, banal moments that were somehow telling me something about the secret life of this city. But in terms of walking, it was really a step in a different direction, because I was thinking about walking in a more again, a more structured way, but trying to be experimental and make connections between that and photographing.
That's interesting. I on that map, you kind of see the that shape that you had there. And were you disappointed that the sun was out that day? You like those dark photos?
Well, you know what? It was this project. I mean, I look back on it, and I don't at the time I wasn't too happy with it when I finished it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it was like, I think it was really about kind of just trying something new and breaking out of what I'd done before. This whole idea of like the sublime and the landscape and the painting and everything like that. I was just trying to do something different. So it was another shift, and it was about, again, I look back at it and I think it was more about the development of the walking and using this as a structural, creative process, making work. So then I graduated from the MA, and I'd been working, we'd started Map 6, and I started to work a lot more seriously on my own personal projects. And at that time, my mother got diagnosed with a serious illness, and I was traveling a lot back and forth between where I was living on the south coast and Birmingham, and I was traveling a lot by the motorway or by train, and I often saw this canal that snaked its way under these motorways and underneath these train lines, and I was became curious about it and started connecting with my younger years walking these canals, and obviously a lot was going on in my mind at the time with my mom not being well, and I was trying to come to terms with that. And I just thought, you know what, I'm going to start looking into this canal and think about if it was possible to walk back all the way from London to Birmingham. It's kind of like a gesture of walking home, but it was also like reconnecting with the past as well. So I checked the canal. I bought a load of maps and I started checking if it was possible to walk back, and I found that you could actually walk the towpath all the way through London, all the way back to the centre of England, to Birmingham. So I started and sort of 2-3 days on the weekends, I started this journey back and making these pictures each week. I would travel to my parents' house, and I'd also try and make pictures as well before on the way there. And I was really interested in photographing this kind of strange borderland between the city and the countryside, and also documenting this space that was once a really interesting, a really important historical place for travelling up and down the country, and transporting goods up and down the country, but also this space that had sort of fallen into decline and was now a place where a lot of people would kind of just, I'd be walking along and you'd see solo people meandering along, and it was just this, connecting with this industrial and this landscape together.
I missed it. Did you end up walking that journey, or were you kind of like driving or taking trains and stopping off?
So what I was doing was I was walking it. I mean, it's about 170 miles, so I was doing it in stages, and I was walking a little bit, then I was heading home, and then I'd come back, edit the pictures, and do it again. So I was kind of gradually making my way along the canal until I made it all the way back home, if that makes sense. I was doing it over a longer period.
Yeah, it does. It does. I kind of envisioned you doing that. You said you were exploring your wild side,
Yeah, I was sleeping out.
You in the sleeping bag. Yeah, just hip hopping, yeah. Down the river. But that's a very, because I was thinking about how is he processing the film? Did he buy enough for the journey? And now it makes sense. So it's really interesting. It's like a really interesting approach to it. But what I'm also noticing too is I'm thinking about it in context to what you were dealing with in your personal life. And so like this construction, you seem to be finding these construction zones or these dilapidated areas that are kind of fading away. And that's what was finding your frame.
Yeah.
Do you think that was kind of a self-reflection on your current state and kind of like
I do.
What you were thinking
Absolutely.
about?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what I was thinking about. I was making a connection between the decline of my mother's health and the decline of this landscape. Yeah, it was... that kind of theme has been in a lot of the work I've made, this sort of transient nature of places, this sort of relentless passage of time. And I was definitely making that connection. And it was, I think we take it for granted, really, that I think we can often think that cities are stable places that don't change, that are always going to be there, but they're constantly changing. They're constantly in this state of flux. There's... and I think about the city where I come from, Birmingham, it's kind of unrecognizable from what it was 30 years ago, because of all the change that's been happening there. So I think I was really connecting with that sense of this place that was undergoing this change, and it was decaying, and it was losing its purpose a little bit, and trying to. Wow. I think it was trying to sort of redefine itself as a green space in places as well.
I had a similar experience with my hometown. I'm from Fort Worth, Texas. And I left for a long time. I think it was like 6 or 7 years or something like that. And I came back and I didn't recognize it. They had built all these new places and all of that stuff. But I found myself reflecting on that and looking back at it. And you talk about this relentless passage of time that brings the inevitable change along with it. Yeah. And with that change, I no longer felt like it was my home. I went back and I'm like, I don't recognize this. This isn't a place in my memory. And so do you ever reflect on that in your work, and kind of how even your definition of a place changes? And do you ever find yourself at conflict with that? And you're like, it doesn't feel like it anymore. And maybe that's what you're reflecting on here. Do you understand where I'm coming from on that?
Yeah, well, I think certainly with Birmingham, which is where this journey ended, that picture that's currently up, that's in Birmingham there. And it's changed so much, and I think that I don't live there anymore, and I just feel, and my mom's since passed away, and I just feel that there's nothing really there for me anymore. It's kind of it's unrecognizable if you go back there now. I mean, it's all kind of modern, shopping orientated. A lot of the history that was certainly there when I was growing up. You've got a shopping centre called the Bullring, which is completely different now, and I just feel alien there. It fills me with a sense of like I don't recognize
exact
it.
feeling I had.
Yeah,
it's the exact feeling I had. I'm like, this isn't my town anymore. It's just reserved to memory now. It's called the same thing, but it's not anymore my place. Is that a strange feeling for you?
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy, because I'm only in my 40s, and the city's completely changed. It's you know, and I remember when I was younger just thinking, this is where I'm from. This is my city. This defines me, and this is never going to change. It's always going to be here. No matter where I travel to, I can come back, and this is home. And I just don't feel that way anymore. I just feel, if I see it, I just feel like I'm not a part of it. So I think
same.
Yeah, that was definitely something that was in my subconscious as I was making the work as well.
Wow.
So I think looking at this work, of course it's landscape work, and it's looking at the sort of architecture in these places and thinking about the passage of time with the water. But I think subconsciously it was also about my mum's health and sort of becoming slowly alienated from this place. So that was another aspect of my, I suppose looking back, it was an aspect of my practice evolving again in terms of walking and sort of trying to refine it a little bit more. And I'll show you very quickly. I don't want to go on too much because I know you've got more to discuss, but I'll quickly show you one last series which I was doing at a similar, well, towards the end of that one, I started making this work, which is, previous work was called Towpath. This series is called Sleeplessness. And at the same time, I was going through a period of insomnia, which I'd suffered from on and off for quite a few years, and still do. Occasionally it comes back. And, I remember one summer just kind of lying in bed all night, one thought kind of going into another, and just passing the whole night feeling so alone in bed, and not being able to sleep because of this. And when that happens day after day, it makes you feel really alone, and kind of like it can have a real effect on your mental health and how you feel. And I started reading about it and discovered that like 1 in 3 people in the UK suffer from insomnia, which I thought was a crazy statistic because I felt such alone.
At one point in time,
yeah, and something like 1 in 10 people in the world suffer from it, which is mad. But anyway, at the time, I was trying to just sort of read up and try and think of a way of coping with it. And I'd read that basically it's when you're lying in bed at night, the best thing to do is to get up and change your scenery and change the way that you're thinking to snap you out of it. So I decided to start doing that and going out for a walk. And then that basically turned to, well, if I'm going out for a walk, why not bring my camera? And over the course of a summer, I made this work, which is a series of about 35 pictures, all around where I lived in Brighton at the time on the south coast. And the work was really about sort of escaping my headspace and and just sort of meditating really on the city where it was, and this sense of isolation and aloneness that I was feeling, and connecting it with the landscape. So I started making these dark landscapes while I was out walking, and each day I was using maps, and I was plotting routes about where I would go walking the next night. And actually it became this cathartic process of getting me through it. And I was just started making pictures of these kind of empty underpasses and blocks of flats and along the coast, like the beaches and woodland areas and places disappearing into the darkness, and making a connection between the urban environment and what I was feeling when I couldn't sleep. So the work was really about insomnia, but it was also about what goes on in the mind when we can't sleep, and the emptiness of the city streets that were outside.
You stepped away from color.
Yeah.
You're no longer shooting color.
Well, in parallel to that, and in parallel to all these projects since doing the MA, I've been working with Map 6, and we've done like a whole load of projects. We're working on our 9th one. I've worked on every one of them. And each of those projects, I started to experiment a lot more. And I've been working in black and white. And since then, I've kind of skipped back and forth between black and white and colour, and tried to be a lot looser with the way that I might work. And I just felt that black and white really suited the emotional content of this work, expressing a lot about, what it was about and what was going on with me. So
I love night shots in black and white, and especially film, because you have that big dynamic range, and so you get these really cool details and shadows and really dark spots. It's quite gorgeous. But speaking back, that first image that you had of the building with the windows lit up, does that not just encapsulate insomnia and your statistic?
Well, that's precisely
that's the statistic right there in a building.
Yeah,
1 in 10 or 1 in 3. It's so strange that you said in Britain. You're right. It's Britain, right? You said it was 1 in 3, but it's worldwide. It's 1 in 10. So it seems like the insomnia problem is focused. It's bigger there than it is in other places. That's fascinating.
Yeah, don't you think it's a crazy statistic? Like, just thinking back to me lying in bed alone, not being able to sleep, really getting really anxious about it, and then just thinking that there's another, probably on the same street, there's another whole bunch of people doing the same thing. It's just
there they are.
Yeah,
there they are. Yeah. And that's amazing. It's just it's quite powerful. I love building shots like this. I take them all the time. I never know what to do with them, but like seeing how you use it in this like body of work, it's you inspired me there. So that's a good one.
That's very cool.
Even though it's like very personal, it's really, really interesting. And I'm always curious about the shift to black and white. And, a lot of people that I see that, they do black and white, but they don't know why, and but in your case, I think it actually fits what you're doing, because when you're in those places, there is a time, especially when you're without sleep, everything blurs. You start losing reality in a way. And a great way to kind of manifest that in a photography practice is just eliminate color, because it adds so much, and you kind of get right to the meat of what it is you're doing. And so it's really interesting. I like that.
I think each body of work, requires, well, the way I look at it, I try not to stick with the same thing. Of course, I'm thinking about walking always, and that's the fundamental glue to each project.
Yeah, it's your process.
Yeah, and I was trying to demonstrate through the different series of showing you that the different approaches to the walking. But I also think from a technical point of view or from a photographic point of view, it depends on what you're photographing, the way that I want to actually photograph it. So, I was using flash in these as well. But, I've been working with a drone, and that's, I love drone photography as well, which I'm doing a lot now. So it doesn't really matter for me about sticking to the same camera. It's more about what the walk is and trying to communicate that in the best way that I can do it.
That's awesome. Talk to me a little bit about, we're going to take a look at your book next, correct?
Yeah.
In that body of work. So talk to me a little bit about where that idea came from. Also, talk to me a little bit about how you've kind of started to think more in book form, and you put together this book, and it came from. Talk to me a little bit about what it took for this next project.
Basically, when I left university, I went on this kind of odyssey of traveling for 8-9 years. And the first place I went to was Spain. I had a Spanish partner at the time. I was learning Spanish. I lived in Madrid, then lived in Barcelona. And somebody I met introduced me to the Camino de Santiago. I'd never heard of it, didn't have a clue what it was. So this is going back in 2003. So I was like, yeah, I mean, it doesn't really, why not? Let's give it a go. So I walked it from Pamplona to Santiago, and it just had a massive impact on me, on the way I thought about walking, on the way I thought about photography, the people that I met there. I met so many different people from so many different walks of life, from like really extravagant flamenco players to an elderly woman who was walking at the last stage of her life. It was the
what
last.
Is the Camino Santiago? What
yeah.
did you say?
Yeah. So this is the Camino de Santiago. Yeah. Is that what you meant? Is that what you asked?
Yeah. What do you give me some context on that? I'm not sure what that is.
Oh, okay. The Camino de Santiago is it's an ancient pilgrimage that's traditionally.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah, it's traditionally religious, but in recent years it's had a revival of interest, and now there's something like, I was reading yesterday, there's something like 450,000 people walked it last year, something crazy like that. Wow. In the last 10 years, it's the amount of people walking it has gone up by 10%, 100%. So I walked it back in 2002, not knowing what it was, and it made this massive impact. I made pictures while I was doing it, but they were on film, and they were I was unprepared, so there was no structure to the pictures. And I always wanted to go back and make a project about it, but I never had a window of opportunity until like 2007. I went through like a relationship breakup. I was moving, and I just thought, I'm going to do it now, slot it into my life. And I was after a new chapter in my life, so I thought it was a great moment to do it. And this time I decided to walk from France to Spain, which was 3 months, about 1,700 kilometers. And then during the walk, the French part was kind of quite solitary, and I was doing a lot of wild camping, still meeting people, but I was sleeping out a lot in my tents. And then when I got to Spain, it was a lot more sociable after crossing the Pyrenees. And I'd kind of set out to make this piece of work about the people that I was walking with and how this path draws people together. And this idea of the way that it untethers people, it sort of sets them free a little bit from the burdens that they have at home. So all of the people that I photographed, all the portraits I made, pretty much were with people that I spent time walking with and talking to and getting to know. And also amongst that, I was also photographing landscapes and observations as well, that was talking about my own personal transformation through this walk as well. So that's essentially what the work was about. And then in terms of book, I'd kind of always had this love for photo books ever since I did my degree. I started collecting them, going back in 1998. I think I bought my first book. And I started when I did the MA, and it was Mark Power. He had this class one day he brought in loads of photo books, and it just really sort of got me excited about photo books and thinking about work in terms of narrative and how looking at photo books is different from an exhibition. So I think this project always needed to be a book. I mean, I'd like to exhibit it as well, but for me, it was really important that it was a book.
That's awesome. So let's take a look. I'm curious.
Yeah.
I would definitely, I've done research, because I love art history and architecture, especially. And they talk about all of the cathedrals that were built along that path in Spain. And all of them had relics, that would attract different people on the pilgrimage. And that's always been a dream. So I didn't know the name of the path. All I knew was the architectural history, of those pilgrimages. But it's growing now. People, I guess, are looking for that life-changing moment, I guess, again, which is really, really interesting. Is that what you found on the path? Is that's what people are after? What's drawing so many people, do you think?
Well, I think, I think people, a lot of people that I met, they were all kind of out for some kind of a change in their life. Obviously you get people who are doing it for the physical thing, the physical challenge of it, or you get people who are doing it for the religious aspect of it. But I would say 90% of people that I met and walked with were doing it because they were trying to overcome something in their life or going through some shift from one chapter in their life to another. So, I think that maybe people are, obviously we live in an age where we can travel more, and it's purposeful traveling. It's not just going to places where you're, where you're going to a place to have a look what it's like and have fun there. You're actually going there as a challenge, and you're going there to walk day by day and really push yourself. So so when you get to Spain, basically when you're following these pilgrimage routes across France and Spain, you have these markers, and in France it's kind of a red and a white marker, and when you get to Spain, it becomes this yellow arrow, and it becomes a good friend, really, because it lets you know that you're following the right path and that you're not lost, which I think is quite a nice metaphor within the to find within the landscape. And it's also the arrow that kind of keeps people together along this same path. So I think when we were looking at doing the book, Ian, who's the publisher and who worked on the design of the book, had this idea for the arrow, which I just thought was perfect, because it's the symbol that sort of keeps everybody together and keeps them safe, keep them walking in the right direction.
You see it every day. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of it's just one of those things. Some days you get these, you're walking along and you kind of get these moments where you think, I don't know if I'm lost or going in the right direction, and it's just such a nice thing to see it. And it's not always that visible, but people who live in these little towns that you walk through in the cities, they paint it on the side of buildings. So often it's just a paint mark, but it's quite a nice it's quite a nice symbol to have on the cover, I think. So these were some of the pictures that I'm just sharing. I'm conscious of time because I don't want to take up too much time, but these are pictures that I made along the walk. And to tell you a bit more about some of the people that I met, this portrait is of somebody that I met called Henry, who was in France, and I was staying in this hostel, and I'd been camping out a lot, and I'd been getting wet a lot in this hostel, and I needed to charge my camera batteries, and I had this hostel all to myself, and it was pouring down with rain outside, and suddenly this figure turned up, and it was this guy. His name was Henry, and we just had it was the first person that I met on the walk that I really connected with, and we kind of sat up all night long chatting. He was telling me about his life. He was a baker, and he was kind of going through these things in his life, and he was kind of really looking to make some changes, and he needed some time out from, he needed to escape from his kind of everyday routine and sort of put himself into a space where nobody knew him, to sort of really think through where he wanted to go with his life, what direction that he was going in. And a lot of people that I met were in a kind of a similar sort of thing. They wanted to think about the direction of their life, or maybe come to terms with something. But I spent a really great night just chatting with him, and it's that, I think they say it's the company of strangers, where you can really open up to people that you don't really know, which happened a lot on the walk. Which is one of the really great things about the experiences of it, is actually talking to people that you don't know and sort of just really getting to know them. And then at the end of a period of time, you just kind of say goodbye, and that's it. And we spent this night chatting, and then the next day he was like, he was a scout, and he was kind of up at the crack of dawn and packing his bags. And I managed to get this one portrait of him in the corridor just before he left. But he was the first person that I really connected with on the walk, and the first kind of a stranger that I had these kind of in-depth conversations with.
It's interesting that you say that about like strangers and stuff, because like there is a freedom with the way you talk when you know you're not going to see that person again.
Yeah.
So they just kind of tell you everything.
Yeah.
It's so true. And you're like, I didn't want to know that, but okay, thank you. But sometimes you're like, wow, that's pretty profound. But
it's a beautiful thing. And I think, people don't normally do that in life. They don't open up. People
no.
guarded. Of course, everyone's different, but when you're there, it was different with this guy, because I got to know him seated in a room, chatting to him. But with the majority of the other portraits that I took of people, I got to know them through walking, where you're walking side by side. You're not looking at one another. So that gives you this amazing opportunity to just sort of let go, really, and talk, because you don't feel confronted. And it's just one of the really great things about doing a walk. It doesn't have to be the Camino. It doesn't have to be any of the Caminos, because there are lots of different Caminos. It can, but just doing a pilgrimage of this kind can be a really nice sort of way of opening up, and I think talking through problems as well really helps people to come to terms with it as well, talking with strangers.
Of course.
Yeah. So I was also capturing these kind of little moments about that sort of gave an insight into the walk, and, this idea of going into, like for this one night, this room becomes your home. And then the next day you move on and you're in a different place and you don't really know where you're going to. So I was just capturing a lot of moments like that as well. I was conscious that I didn't just want to have a piece of work that was all portraits, because I don't just want to tell that story. I also want to tell the story of the walk and the place and my own kind of transformative journey as I'm going. This was a really nice guy I met called Julius from Germany. And at the time, I'll give you a backstory of this picture. At the time, I'd been walking for about 2 or 3 weeks, and I'd been kind of filling my water bottle up just from water sources anywhere. And normally I'd put like a tablet in it to purify the water, but I don't know if I forgot or it was something happened. I don't know, but I got really, really sick, and I ended up just collapsing in this kind of in this bush at the side of the road. And I was completely out of it, didn't really know what was going on. And this pilgrim came along and picked me up and gave me some water, and then just carried me for the next probably like 6-7 kilometers to the next town. And it must have took him forever to do it. And it must have been hard because I was really ill and I was throwing up at the side of the path and everything like that. But he managed to get me to the next town, and he got me a bed. He bought me some food and left me some water, and then he left. And I woke up the next day, and he was gone. And I just remembered that was like one of the kindest things that had ever happened to me, because I was totally out there in the elements on my own. And I just couldn't believe that somebody would do something like that. And I was constantly, throughout the course of this walk, I was constantly confronted with acts of kindness like that. But anyway, I just got through that night and that day, and I was feeling a little bit sort of worse for wear. And then I met Julius, and he was he was part of a group that I walked with, the first group that I walked with. And I was so happy to be able to walk for a few days with other people and get to know them. And he was a really nice guy. They all made me feel really part of this group. But at that point, I'd been camping out alone. I'd got through this sickness, and I really needed to sort of be surrounded by other people and other walkers, and to have that shared experience. But yeah, he was a student at the time. He was learning photography, and we sort of connected through that love of photography. And he was really into things like Lord of the Rings and Terry Pratchett. So he kind of liked that whole English aspect of our relationship. So that was nice. I think we walked for about 5 or 6 days together. So yeah, that was another person that I walked with.
What a
and then
story.
Again, captured.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, it was.
It's like a little angel that came along and lifted you up. And then, did you feel a little vulnerable after that?
Yeah, that's
kind of, you're like, I just need people.
Yeah, that's it. Because I didn't get a picture of the guy who did that for me, but I'll never forget him.
That's unfortunate.
Wow. Yeah, when I see that picture of Julius, I know I met him on the same day. So I always that story. So I have good.
How'd you get through it? Did you?
What's that?
How'd you get through the sickness? Did you end up going to a doctor or just sleeping?
No,
it off?
Slept it off. That was it. I needed a bed.
Okay.
It went within a day. But out of it,
definitely water then.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
It
must have been
interesting.
So that was an interesting moment, but it was kind of like, it felt like something that I had to go through. It's a bit of a cleansing, really, and
do you feel like that's what this thing takes you through? And did it, like, doing a journey like this, doing a walk like this, or a pilgrimage in some regard, is it reveals certain things to you? And you might tell me as you go through this book, and so I might be getting ahead of myself. I am precocious, so this pilgrimage kind of reveals certain things, and like almost everyone goes through a moment like that, or so, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think you need to.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think that, when you're doing something like this and you've got all of your stuff on your back, all of your belongings, say for me it was 3 months, but you're out there alone, and it can really make you feel empowered, the fact that you're in control of your own life and whatever happens, and that you're always going to hit these real low points. I met loads of people who are on a real low point. It can be a physical thing. It can be, knees going, or feet hurting, or getting lost, or just, hating the monotony of walking every day and just feeling knackered or missing home. But I think you have to walk through that. And when you walk through it, it empowers you. And it makes you. The other thing about these kind of walks as well is, the goals are really, you can really see the goals on each day. What I mean by that is, in your ordinary life back home, everyday goals are not always that visible. Whereas when you're doing a walk, all you've got to do is get to the end of the day, find a bed,
get to the next point. Yeah,
have something to drink, make sure you're okay, maybe have a bit of company on the way, but that simplicity of living and achieving it really lifts people. And I think when you go through a hardship like getting sick, and it is inevitable, it does happen a lot. or your feet are playing up, then when you get through it, if you can get through it, then it really picks you up. It's one of the pleasures of doing it. I think a lot of people who go on these kind of walks are looking to find a bit of inner strength, see what they're capable of, and sort of seeing if they can push beyond it. It's a real test.
Wow.
And how often do you get to do that in everyday life, really?
Who has the time?
Yeah.
Or who thinks they have the time, to spend 3 months doing anything like that.
Yeah, that's it. It's a window of opportunity that you have to look for, but if you get the chance to do it, it's a really good way of seeing what you're capable of.
And you made a book out of it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, you're going to inspire so many people. They're like, wow, I don't know why we jumped up another 100,000 people this year. Yeah.
Crazy, isn't it? Because
that's amazing.
Yeah, it's like, what are all these people looking for? Of course they want adventure and to experience something that they probably think is interesting, but there's got to be more to it than that,
Of course.
I don't know if life nowadays just makes people feel a little bit lost, a little bit isolated, a little bit directionless, and they need to find something or spend a bit of time soul searching,
Well, we had, I think in a lot of ways, I call this era, and this is my own term, so don't quote this, but we're kind of in post-religion,
Mm-hmm.
And we had so many institutions that kind of gave us a reason to believe and have faith and all this other stuff. But now that kind of a lot of those institutions are being questioned, I think a lot of us don't know what to believe in anymore, much less what to put faith in anymore. And the monotony of every day is kind of compounds on itself, and you kind of lose that purpose. But when you do something like this and challenge yourself in this way and give yourself these goal points and you achieve those things, you find that you not only do you have the ability to accomplish something, but you start to have faith in yourself, being able to do things again.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of our institutions, especially post-religion, gave us that. And even the pilgrimage back then was in the eyes of, doing that, with religious institutions.
Mm-hmm.
And now I find so many people that don't know what to believe in it anymore. And so, by result, they don't believe in themselves anymore. And it's a strange place to be in. And you're kind of doing it in the context of I like how you're still using the word pilgrimage, as opposed to an adventure, because it still has that connotation. But I don't know. There's just something about what you're talking about here that I think is really, really powerful and important and needed today. It's interesting. Continue as you wished.
No, I think you've hit the nail on the head with what you were saying. I really got that sense when I was walking, and also for me, I was going through a transition. I had a relationship that had come to an end, so I was thinking through the changes of my life. But then there's another element we were talking about. I think you were talking about, was it Los Angeles, the way that people don't walk anymore that much in the States?
The United States, we're a car culture. Our cities aren't built for walking. Yeah, and
I think it was Rebecca Solnit that called that the disembodiment of everyday life. So it's the idea that we're kind of disconnecting ourselves through disconnecting our connection with the body. We're sort of reliant on cars, and we're kind of doing things through screens, and we're not using our body as much as we used to, and we're feeling disconnected from ourselves. So I think that's also a really important element of doing something like this, is that reconnection with your physical side. Because I think, like I said before, I don't think we don't often know what we're capable of until we put ourselves into a vulnerable position, so we can push through it.
And that's so true. And I just want to preface this to all my listeners in New York and in the Northeast. Your cities are built for walking, but a lot of the United States is not. It's very much a car culture. So, but there are certain places that do. But I'll let you proceed. I I just wanted to make sure that
But that's
my New
in
Yorkers
England.
out there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's in England as well. We were working on a project in Milton Keynes, which is a really super modern city in England. When I say we, Map 6, and you know, that city is it was 50 years at the time, 50 years old, but it's an architectural feat that architects often really admire, because it was kind of designed with cars in mind primarily over people. So it's about the sort of the transit of cars through the city and making that as smooth as possible. So that seems to be a direction that even our cities and towns are being built in. But it's not just in the UK, in the United States anyway. I guess it's happening everywhere, really.
Yeah. Well, I didn't really notice it until I got to Europe, and I realized I didn't need a car, and I could get all over Europe basically by train, and everything's centered around the train stations. And so like you can get anywhere you need to go by doing that. And so like you don't realize it until you don't have it, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't even imagine living in the United States without a car. Like it's like a necessity. Like you absolutely need it. But when you talk about, you said Rebecca Solnit, and she's talking about this disembodiment, it is extremely prevalent in the United States. And I think a lot of people understand that when you say that, especially if they do live in the States. We choose walking when we want to. It's a leisure. We go and do it because it's something we want to do.
Yeah.
It's not because you have to, you know? And that's a big difference. Like now I don't have a car. So like I have to, if I got to go somewhere, I got to walk. But there's also a joy in that, being able to do that. And so there's something about it. And I think this choice of a pilgrimage and doing it is really, really interesting. And I can't help but think about me doing this now. Like,
yeah, do
I want to go do it. I want to go. Yeah.
Well, you're not far now.
I might
So
even
you know,
follow in your footsteps a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's a experience that I'd recommend everybody do if they can fit it into their life. So a few more, a little bit more about these pictures. So this guy, basically, when I set out on this pilgrimage and I wanted to make a piece of work, I was kind of conscious that part of the walk was along the Camino de Santiago, and I know that's something that's been photographed before. So I was quite conscious of trying to avoid what other photographers had done. So I didn't really want to photograph too much of the religious element, because I think it had been done, and also the sort of the pilgrim element, the element in terms of the daily rituals of what a pilgrim does, because I think that's been documented as well. But so I was concentrating more on the people that I was walking with and this notion of a transformative journey. But in this particular picture, a thing that I really love is when you start the pilgrimage, if you start in Spain, you're given this shell to hang on to the back of your rucksack, and that sort of marks you as a pilgrim when you're walking through towns or staying somewhere. But I liked this guy because he's smoking a cigarette and he's using it as an ashtray, and I just thought that was a really really fun. I hadn't seen that before, because normally pilgrims I met were really precious about it. But he was just getting out with his dog, smoking a fag, taking it all in, and I just thought, I've got to get a picture of this guy.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Well, and so many people are just ash outside, just ash there, and so why you felt like that was that's interesting.
Yeah. And you meet all kinds of characters on the walk. That's one of the beauties of it.
Yeah. But it looks like a character.
Yeah,
it looks like someone really interesting to talk to.
Yeah,
loves the dog.
I love the
cute dog.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. He's got his own little companion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But alongside the portraits, again, I was photographing. I was trying to sort of communicate this idea of people from all walks of life coming together, and how this path, this journey sort of draws them into the same place, and the fact that there's no hierarchy as a pilgrim. We're all kind of there on a level plane, which I think is, again, one of the attractions of why people like to be there. It's that everyone's out to help one another, and it's kind of like a little community. So, I think I was trying to communicate that sense of coming together through a lot of these more kind of still lives, like that one and this one, and yeah, throughout the book. So the portraits are kind of split up with these more sort of observational images.
It's great.
Another pilgrim, Marjana, which was really nice person to walk with. At this point in the walk, I was becoming a part of a really large group, which was really crazy, because I'm not really a group person. I'm quite a solitary person. Yet I was part of this group who were at some points maybe 90, 100 people. And we're all kind of, it was crazy. And we were communicating using social media like Facebook and WhatsApp, and meeting up again using these sort of technologies, saying where people were staying. So the walk had really changed from me in France, kind of camping out in the rain on my own, not really meeting many people, towards the end of the walk in Spain, walking with this enormous group. And which I absolutely loved. It was fascinating. It was a real transformation. It felt like there was a real narrative to the walk, from isolation to being in a really sociable situation. And Marjana was a really nice person that I walked with, who kind of stepped in and out of this social situation. Some days she'd just kind of disappear, and I wouldn't see her for a few days because she needed that time away from the group, and then she'd come back again. And but yeah, it was an interesting period towards the end of the walk, because there was just so many people that were, that I was walking with on a daily basis.
It reminds me of this is an obscure connection, but Forrest Gump. Have you seen the movie?
Yeah.
When he starts to run coast to coast, and by the end of it, he's got this long beard and this huge group of people running behind him, and then he stops. Yeah. And he's like, I'm going to go home now. And then they're like, what? But he amassed this group of people that kind of joined along in this thing. And I think there is something about that. A shared sense of purpose, a shared sense of mission. I think, this kind of journey. And I'm like you. I probably even like this other person that you had met. You said Marjana? Yeah. What's her name?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd probably like her. I probably would take off for a few days and do my own thing for a while and then come back. I'm not a big group person. I never really have been. I always tell people I like vacations when it's like 2 people. That's it. Just me and another person. And that tops 3. But once it gets beyond that, then everyone coordinating, and you're always waiting, and I just like to get after it. Like, I'm just kind of like that. Is that kind of how you are?
Yeah. It was,
yeah.
God, I guess I didn't even recognize myself being in such a social environment, because that's just not me at all. But at the same time, I was kind of, I was there thinking, well, this is what I'm here to do, so I'm going to stick with it. And
interesting. So you pushed yourself.
Yeah. And
wow.
But I mean, it wasn't a sacrifice. It was, these people were awesome, and I was really enjoying walking with them. It was a real once in a lifetime experience. If I ever did this again, I don't know if it would ever live up to the first, when I did it this time, because it was felt like such a great moment. So I guess I had this side to me. I was torn, I was torn to the sort of being a bit wilder and just disappearing and camping on my own and having my own space. But at the same time, I knew that I was in this really sociable situation that I would never be in again. So I didn't really want to leave it. But yeah, it was a unique little bubble of life within this landscape that I don't think it's the sort of thing you experience every day. And then just to finish, really with walking with strangers, these were towards the end of the walk. And And this was the last section where I decided to walk to Murcia, which is the coast of death, which is on the far end of Spain.
What a name.
Yeah, it's basically when you reach this part, it's an additional part of the traditional pilgrimage. But it was a part that I wanted to walk anyway because it's really beautiful. But the idea is that you get to the end and then you kind of run into the sea and strip all your clothes off and basically have a new chapter in your life and sort of get rid
Death of the old you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it was,
it's like you're being baptized.
Yeah. It's a really interesting idea, and it's kind of like
it doesn't sound so scary.
No, it doesn't. No, it's not a scary place. It's wonderful, and it's it's a place of hope because you've got all these people who are there, and they're all kind of going back to their lives, but with a new. Well, I can't say for everybody, but hopefully with a renewed sense of what they wanted to do. Just a few spreads from the book. So I kind of sat on the work for a few years, and I worked hard, sort of editing it and sequencing, and I shot like a lot of pictures and got them down to about 60. And then when myself and the publisher agreed to put the book together, Ian, who's with Another Place Press, he kind of did another look at the sequence of pictures and put together these bearings, which I hadn't seen before, but they're really, I was so happy with them. They're really lovely. And it was something that I didn't see in the work. So, there's the actual sequence in the work was a kind of a collaboration between me and Ian, who's the publisher. But he's brilliant. He's just kind of got so many different ideas, and he shaped.
Was it chronological, or did he just kind of do a collection, like more aesthetic?
I kind of I edited the work in a geographical sense, so it told the story from beginning to end of the walk, which was probably in hindsight a bit more obvious. And then Ian sat with the work and looked through it and sort of added that element of how pictures work together a lot more, thinking about it as a book publisher. Because obviously when you're experiencing the images as single images and then as images that sit against one another in a book, it's a completely different experience. So he brought his knowledge of book publishing, and I was really happy with the sequence, which did shift things around a bit, but we kind of had a conversation about certain things and then came to an agreement that we're really happy with, and the book ended up being 47 pictures. So it's a nice tight edit.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So that's Walking with Strangers.
How many did you shoot? How many images did you get?
Goodness me,
total, like without the edit. Yeah.
Oh dearie me, thousands. I'm not sure, but
I just want everyone to understand that he went from thousands to 60 to 47. That is a hard thing to do.
Yeah, well,
that is extremely difficult. This is why it takes years sometimes.
Yeah,
to do these projects.
Yeah, because it's each picture that shouldn't be there takes the narrative of the story off in a different direction. You don't want you want every picture that's in the book to be as pertinent as the one that follows it and the one that precedes it. So it's a different form. When you're thinking about it in terms of a book, the way you're turning the pages. It's an interesting process that I really like.
When you think about that, and based on what you just said there, you said it's got to be pertinent to the story. So when someone looks at this book, what are you hoping they take away?
Well, I'm hoping that obviously they'll get a sense of the walk, but also a kind of the main thing really is to sort of encourage people to think about it as a transformative journey, this kind of untethering of people and from their everyday lives to this sort of experience in this this transformative journey. So hopefully throughout the narrative that becomes clear, the final images.
I can't help but get another sense of community. Like it's being able to reconnect to people again, because we're so separate from them in so many ways. And it's like you desire that connection with others again. And yeah, I can't help but from what you told me, and then getting those portraits, it's just finding another sense of community again, which leads me. It's a great segue to a community that you've built, or you helped build, which is a collective. And talk to me a little bit about Map 6. I want to close out the show with that, and then I have one final question for you, and then we'll do it with that. But talk to me a little bit about Map 6, and tell me about where that came from. And I think it's a great segue. We were talking about people that we meet, this community that kind of happens in the process, and then now you're in the middle of a collective. So tell me about that.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to share some pictures.
Oh, okay. Of course. Yeah.
So going back to 2010, when I was doing the MA in Brighton, it was a small group. There was 12 people in the group, and 6 of us we just got on really well, and we had this shared sort of interest in landscape and people and place. And what we some of us had kind of exhibited in the past, and touched a little bit on that, but we were kind of going through this photographic journey together. Got on really well, and we decided to start exhibiting together, and we were working on our final piece for the MA, and we put on a show in London where we exhibited that work outside of the university just for ourselves as Map 6, collecting those projects together. And we found that we worked so well in terms of coordinating the show, because there's so much to do when you put on an exhibition in terms of the curation and the marketing and getting the works transported and printed and doing talks and all of these different elements that goes into putting a show together. Each of us had different skills that really we could bring to the table to get that done much more efficiently. So we put that show together, and then we did another one in Brighton, and both of them we were really happy with them. We had lots of footfall. We felt like we were onto a good thing. And we started thinking about the idea of what it would be like if we started to make work together as a collective. When I say work together, I mean actually physically in the same place at the same time making images, which I think is quite a unique thing. And certainly at the time, there weren't really many collectives around that we were aware of. So, we decided to start making work together. In the first week, initially we made a project in the UK with the idea of home, and we each went out and sort of shot a mini project about what home meant to us. But it kind of meandered and went on a bit, and we kind of felt as if it might be better if we went to a different place to make work, which would add a sense of urgency. We decided to go to Moscow for the first project, and we spent 5 days doing the Moscow project, each doing a little kind of collective, individual project, and then we brought it together as a collective exhibition and publication. And we just thought this is a really good way of working. We're learning a lot from one another as photographers, as image makers, as editing as well, and feedback sessions. So it kind of grew from there, really. And then that was the first project. And then over the years, we've been together about 14 years. We've worked on 9 projects. We've grown from 6 photographers to 10. We've worked in places like Lithuania, Milton Keynes. We looked at the 50th anniversary of the city there. We've worked in Finland. We were looking at the World Happiness Report, did a project on that, 9 of us, where we published it as a book, did a series of exhibitions. We worked in Wales, where we made a series of zines. So this is the Finland book that we made, which we worked with the Finnish Institute to produce that and to fund it. We also had a couple of writers do a really nice introduction for us. And we did a book launch at the Photographers Gallery in London. We've done this publication, which we commissioned another place press to put together 4 zines. And that was a unique project where we split the group into working in pairs, and then we both made a zine. We both made a piece of work in our pairs to make into a zine. So it was always going to be a publication piece. And these are some of the images from past shows. So in the top left, we've got that was the opening of the Lithuania project in the Ongar Gallery in Brighton. Down bottom left, that's our Finland, that we did a show in Worthing, Colonnade House, and that was the Finland project where we also had the book as well. And that to the right, bottom right, is the opening of the book launch at the Photographers Gallery. And so we kind of do different projects, working in different countries. We collaborate within the group. We also collaborate with organisations, photo festivals, writers, musicians, anything. We're interested in collaborating with people from any discipline, really, depending on what the project is. Couple of projects I've worked on. This is the Moscow project. This was the first one. So for this one, we were making work about Moscow and how it had just kind of opened its doors to people coming in and being able to visit, because it had been really difficult to travel there previously. And I wanted to make a piece about I followed a path around the circular tube line, and over 5 days I walked it using these maps, plotted a route, walked it, and it was a kind of a sort of observation project of these entrances to tube stations. And I was thinking about the way this circular tube lines orbits the city in 29 minutes, and it just carries on and on and on, keeps going. And so I was thinking about that and the repetitive sort of cyclical moments in the city. So that was a walk I did for the Moscow project. And then this was the Lithuania project, where it was a television tower. I was interested in events that had happened there. There'd been a siege 25 years before. This was the period when Lithuania was getting its independence. There'd been a military siege on the tower, and I decided to do a commemorative walk, which was basically 25 laps around the tower, but sort of going out into the city. And that was observing it. I was taking pictures of the tower from all points around the city during this walk. And I think it was over 6 days, I walked about 170 kilometres, just photographing this building all over the city. And then this project, quickly, this is part of the Finnish the Happiness Project. And this was when I walked with 4 individuals, all living in Finland. And we had, basically they chose the walk, and we walked together, and we'd record conversations and talk about culture in Finland and happiness, and how walking was an important part of the culture in Finland and the connection with the landscape. And then
it's that happiness project was interesting. I heard about that one because apparently Finns are the happiest people on the planet. So and so you guys went out there to kind of find out why. Yeah, I thought that was interesting.
Well, you know, they've been nominated the happy or the world's contentest nation 7 times in a running, which is just crazy. So when we first started thinking about doing this project, it was just like, how is that possible? We were even skeptical about what it even meant to be the happiest nation, you know. So we just thought, we've got to go out there
naturally,
and start making work. And 9 of us went, and we all made a different series that related to this notion of happiness. I haven't got time to talk about them all, but it was like a really in-depth project that kind of went on for about 2.5, 3 years that we're involved with in terms of making the work. We went back a couple of times, exhibiting it, publishing it. We did a series of talks about it as well. So it was a really lovely project to be involved in, and the Finnish Institute were brilliant as well. We worked really closely with them. And then finally, I'll give you a very quick sneak preview into this new project. We're working in Italy, and we're looking at, I can't say too much about it at this stage because we're still editing and working on the work, but we're looking at this region in Italy around Treviso, and we're looking how innovative manufacturing has shaped the landscape. And there's 7 of us have been working out there. We've just come back working with Steve from Urbanaut and Lab 27 and the Benetton Foundation. So I'm really, really loving this project, and can't wait to get the work out there and start sharing it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's when I crossed your path. That's when I first met you. Yeah.
We'd been out shooting.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it was really nice to meet you. We'd been out shooting and we'd met Steve, and it was just like, it was really nice to catch up with you.
Yeah. Well, I have a question. It's and I guess it's kind of related to, I've heard of a lot of collectives, but a lot of times I've never really heard of them working together on a project. A lot of times when I see these, it's like a collective and they all kind of do their own thing, like solo geniuses that just decide to kind of come together and share work together in singular places. But in this case, I think what you guys are doing a little different is actually truly collaborating on projects. And talk to me about what it's like to do that. I'm quite intrigued by that.
Yeah, well, it's true what you say. There are, certainly in the last few years, there's a lot of collectives that are kind of coming onto the scene, and it makes sense because there's a lot of courses to study photography, and it's a really nice way when you come out of education to have that sort of social network around you with other photographers, to sort of continue that journey. But you're right, a lot of, I don't actually think I've ever seen anyone working together in terms of making images together at the same time.
I don't think I've ever seen it.
Yeah, I think it's quite a unique thing that we have, and it probably doesn't work for everybody, but somehow we've made it work. It does help the fact that we're very good friends and we get on really well together. And we've been doing it a long time, but it's this whole thing of, I think we trust one another as well. And that's really important because, your creative process is a very personal thing. And I really trust the other guys when we're having feedback sessions. So like, just to tell you about a normal day shooting, we'll go out. In Italy, I've been working a lot with Richard Shivers, Leia Ankers and Heather Schuker. So we go out, actually drive out together and shoot in the same location. We'd work out ways to actually approach places and how we were going to each fit in. So, for example, Leia and Heather shoot beautiful sort of intricate portraits, pose portraits. And I was kind of doing more observational shots of people working, and Richard was doing large architectural images, so sort of setting the place. So we all kind of had our little ways of approaching it from a photographic point of view. But then when you get back on the evenings, or when we get back to the UK, we all get together and share the work, and we sort of trust one another with our feedback, because we're all trying to sort of get the work into the best shape it can be. So the feedback sessions are really important, that we're honest, and sort of, even if you're saying stuff that's potentially a bit critical, it's important to hear that because you're trying to make the best work that you can do and shape it into the best project that it can be. But also, we've all got different approaches to photography, whether it be in sort of, you've got photographers who are into found photography and archival stuff, or street photography, or medium format cameras, large format cameras, drone work, more about the history. So we've all got kind of different ways of approaching from a technical point of view and our own sort of interests, but they're all brought together by that sort of love of people and place and landscape.
I just have one final question for you, and then we'll finish up. And it's the one question I ask everybody.
Yeah.
And I always tease this at the end of my shows too. So I said this in the last few of them too, but I might do something with the answers of this question, like make it maybe a collective video or something, but it is a simple one. And it's literally seeking for advice, for other photographers out there. Do you have any insights that you can give to image makers out there? Anything that you wish you could tell younger you about what any good helpful things that someone can take away?
I think keeping it sort of pertinent to what I was just talking about. I think obviously you could say things like finding what you're passionate about and you're finding your voice and that, but I think one thing that's been really important for me is surrounding myself with good people. And I think that I was very lucky to have that with Map 6 because, when you come out of education, it can be a real feeling of aloneness. It's like you've got to try and conquer this photography world alone. And if you've got good people around you that can help you do that and give you advice and learn from, the whole learning thing is really important in Map 6. So, learning about how to approach things and different skills, I think that's a really useful thing to have. So particularly if you're in education, have a look around and see the people that you connect with and see what you can build together and surround yourself with good people that you can rely on. I think that would be.
I think that's great. That's perfect. I think I've heard that once or twice, is find a good community, and you're exactly right. That's what I miss about the master's program, is being able to really refine your work. It's really difficult making work in a void, but getting feedback and seeing if an image is like resonating makes a big difference. Love it. I really enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you so much for coming on.
No problem.
Tell everyone how they can connect with you. Are you on social media? Do you have an Instagram?
Yeah.
That people can find and follow you, and a website?
Absolutely. Paul Walsh Photography, .co.uk is my website. Instagram and Map6 as well, map6.co.uk. It's a website. We've got all the Instagram and social connections on there, but thanks so much for having me. It's been a real joy talking to you, Patrick. Really enjoyed it. And
of course,
everyone for tuning in. Hope you could understand what I was saying in my grumpy accent.
Yeah. Well, of course you can. You were very clear, and I think you tell your story really well. And I will just say this: everyone follow Map 6. Everyone out there follow Map 6. It is a really great Instagram feed. They have takeovers from other artists. And so not only do they feature their individual artists, but they also feature other artists where they take over the feed and share their work. And it's really, really fun feed to follow. And I didn't get your handle on Instagram. Is it Paul Walsh?
Yeah.
Or is it Paul Walsh Photography? Just Paul Walsh? Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again. And I really appreciate having you on. And it was really, really great. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everybody.
And to all those that have made it this far, thank you so much for joining us on the Urbanaut Podcast. If you like content like this, please like, share, and comment down below. That all helps us. Basically, that helps us grow our audience and grow this show. And that's one way you can show support. Another way you can show support is to join our Patreon page. Become a member there. We offer extended episodes. This might be one of them. Depending on how long this edit is. But a lot of times I try to keep these shows in 2 hours, and that's what you see in our main feed. But we sometimes have a little in-depth, more conversation that goes, and I want to make sure you have access to those. So we make those available to our members on patreon.com. But as always, we'll see you next time.